There is a moment that almost every man experiences at least once, a moment that feels small, but emotionally it carries a lot of weight. You meet a woman, the conversations feel good, the energy is natural, she laughs at your jokes, she replies quickly, sometimes even sends messages first. For a while, everything feels smooth, then suddenly something changes. Her excitement fades and eventually she disappears, no explanation, no argument, no closure, just silence. Days pass, then more days pass. And if you're honest with yourself, part of your mind starts wondering, did I say something wrong? Did she lose interest? Was she talking to someone else? But eventually you start accepting it. You stop checking your phone as often, you focus on your work, your life, your routine, and slowly your mind moves forward. Then one day, something unexpected happens. Your phone lights up, a message appears, and when you look at the screen, you see her name. Sometimes the message is simple, "Hey stranger," sometimes it's casual, "Hi, how have you been?" Sometimes it's even playful, "Did you forget me already?" And suddenly, all the questions come rushing back. Why is she texting now? What does she want? Should I respond right away? Should I ignore it? But here is the reality that most men never hear explained clearly. When a woman reaches out after silence, the situation is not emotionally neutral anymore. Something has shifted, not just in communication, but in the psychological dynamic between you and her. Because in female psychology, returning after silence often carries an unspoken question. Did my absence affect you? And the way you respond will answer that question instantly. Most men don't realize this. They think they are simply replying to a text message, but in reality, they're revealing something deeper, their emotional position, their level of attachment, their level of self-control. And this is where many men unknowingly lose the advantage. Because the moment they see her messenger, their reaction becomes emotional. They reply immediately. They show excitement. Sometimes they even show relief. "Hey, I missed you. Where did you disappear to? I thought you forgot about me." Now think about what this communicates psychologically. It tells her something without you directly saying it. It tells her that her silence had power over your emotions. And in attraction dynamics, power is rarely about control. It's about perception. Who seems more emotionally stable? Who appears more centered? Who looks like their life continued normally, even without the other person? This is why the moment she returns after silence, this becomes a very important moment. Not because of the message itself, but because of what your response signals. Men who panic lose attraction. Men who complain lose respect. Men who react emotionally often restart the same cycle again: interest, distance, return. Distance, but there is another type of response. A response that doesn't try to impress, doesn't try to punish, doesn't try to demand explanations. Instead, it communicates something calm, something subtle, something powerful. It communicates that your life did not pause. And strangely enough, that calm emotional position is what often restores attraction again. But before we talk about what to say, there is something important every man needs to understand. Because if you misunderstand why women disappear in the first place, you will always respond the wrong way when they return. So let's talk about the psychology behind that silence. Because silence in relationships is rarely random. Imagine this scenario: you meet someone new. At first, the connection feels exciting. Messages feel effortless. Conversations feel natural. Everything feels promising. But attraction, especially early attraction, is emotional, and emotions change quickly when people are still getting to know each other. Sometimes a woman pulls back simply because she feels uncertain. Sometimes she pulls back because life becomes busy. And sometimes she pulls back because another connection appeared. This is something many men struggle to accept, but honesty is important. Attraction is not always exclusive in the early stages. People explore connections until one begins to feel stronger. Now, when a woman becomes curious about someone else, she may temporarily shift her attention. And the easiest way to do that is by creating distance, less texting, shorter replies, eventually silence from a male perspective. This can feel confusing, but from a psychological perspective, it is often simply emotional exploration. However, not every connection she explores will feel right. Sometimes the excitement fades, sometimes the chemistry isn't there, sometimes she realizes something unexpected. And when that happens, her mind naturally remembers previous emotional connections. including you. Now here is where something interesting happens when she thinks about reaching out again. She becomes curious about something, not consciously, but emotionally. She wonders, how will he react? Will he sound upset? Will he sound needy? Will he sound desperate for attention? Or will he sound calm? This curiosity is subtle but powerful, because women are naturally drawn toward emotional strength, not loud strength, not aggressive strength, but emotional stability, the ability to remain composed even when situations feel uncertain. And the moment she sends that message after silence, she begins observing your emotional tone carefully, which means the next message you send matters more than you think. Because if your reply sounds like someone who was waiting, the attraction level usually drops. But if your reply sounds like someone who simply continued living his life, something different happens, curiosity grows again, respect quietly increases, and sometimes interest returns stronger than before. But understanding this dynamic requires emotional discipline, and discipline is something many men lose at the moment they see that message. Because the truth is, silence can create emotional tension, and when the silence breaks, people want immediate relief, they want clarity, they want reassurance. But attraction rarely grows from emotional relief. Attraction grows from emotional intrigue, from curiosity, from uncertainty, which is why calm responses are so powerful. They remove emotional desperation and replace it with emotional balance, and balance is attractive. The men who naturally attract women often share one quiet trait. Their lives appear full, whether someone is texting them or not, and that is the energy we are about to talk about next. Because when she texts you after silence it, there is one simple response that communicates this energy instantly without sounding arrogant, without sounding cold, without sounding emotional, a response that quietly says something powerful. Didn't stop. And that sentence, my life didn't stop, it may sound simple, but psychologically it communicates something incredibly powerful, because the moment a woman returns after silence, the next few messages between you and her quietly define the emotional balance of the interaction. Who seems eager, who seems calm, who seems emotionally affected, and who seems completely centered. Now, here is where most men unknowingly lose their position, not because they lack confidence, but because they misunderstand the moment. They think the goal is to win the conversation, but the real goal is to maintain emotional stability. Imagine the situation. A woman disappears for 10 days, explanation, no conversation, nothing, and then suddenly a message appears. Hey stranger, now the man sees this message and immediately feels relief. It's maybe even excitement, because part of him was wondering if she would ever reach out again. So he responds instantly, hey, I missed you. Or sometimes he replies with frustration, where did you disappear to? Why did you ignore me? Now from his perspective, this feels honest, it feels direct, it feels emotionally real, but from a psychological perspective, something subtle just happened. He revealed that her absence had emotional control over him, and in attraction dynamics, control over emotions often shifts the balance of respect. Because when someone realizes their absence affected you strongly, they subconsciously feel they have more influence over your emotional state. And attraction rarely grows where emotional dependence becomes visible. Not because women want power, but because attraction naturally gravitates toward emotional strength. Strength doesn't mean pretending you don't care. It doesn't mean acting cold. And it definitely doesn't mean ignoring someone out of pride. Real emotional strength simply means this: your life continues normally, whether someone texts you or not. Now, this is where the right response becomes important, because the goal is not to punish her. The goal is not to interrogate her. And the goal is definitely not to act like you were desperately waiting. Instead, the goal is to respond in a way that quietly communicates emotional balance. One of the most powerful responses is also one of the simplest: something calm, something neutral, something relaxed. For example, hey, good to hear from you. Been busy lately, how are you? Now, at first glance, this message seems ordinary, almost boring, but psychologically, it does three very important things. First, it acknowledges her message without emotional excitement. You didn't ignore her, but you also didn't react with relief. Your tone stays balanced. Second, the phrase "been busy lately" communicates something powerful without saying it directly. You are telling her something about your life. Your days were full. Your attention was occupied. Your world didn't stop. And that single signal quietly removes the emotional power her silence might have had. Third, the message redirects the conversation forward instead of backward. You didn't ask where she went. You didn't demand explanations. You simply moved the interaction ahead. How are you? This is important because attraction tends to weaken when conversations become confrontational too early, especially after distance. When someone returns after silence, they are often testing the emotional temperature of the interaction. If they sense anger, defensiveness, or emotional pressure, the natural reaction is to withdraw again. But when they sense calmness, curiosity begins to grow. She starts wondering something, not consciously, but emotionally. Why isn't he reacting like other men? Because many women have experienced the opposite reaction many times before. Multiple messages, questions, frustration, emotional confrontation. So when a man responds calmly instead, it creates psychological contrast. And contrast triggers curiosity. Curiosity is powerful because curiosity pulls attention back. It creates space for attraction to reappear. Now, there is another subtle reason this calm response works so well. It reflects something deeper than words. It reflects self-respect. Self-respect is one of the most quietly attractive traits a person can have because it signals emotional independence. When someone respects themselves, their emotional world doesn't collapse when attention disappears. They continue their routines, their ambitions, their friendships, their growth. And when they interact with others, their attention feels like a choice, not a need. This difference is incredibly important in attraction dynamics because attention that feels needed often loses value. But attention that feels chosen feels meaningful, which is why the tone of your message matters more than the words themselves. The words can be simple, but the tone must communicate calm confidence, not arrogance, not indifference, just quiet emotional balance. Now imagine how different this feels from the typical reaction. Instead of panic, she receives calmness. Instead of emotional pressure, she receives relaxed conversation. And suddenly the dynamic begins shifting again because the moment she realizes something, the emotional equation changes. She realizes that you did not chase. You did not react emotionally and you did not appear affected by the silence. This realization often triggers something interesting, interest, sometimes even renewed respect. Because emotional stability is rare and rare qualities tend to stand out. But there is still another important detail most men overlook in this situation, something subtle but extremely powerful. It is not just what you say, it is also how much you say. And this is where many men accidentally lose the balance again. Because once the conversation restarts, they begin filling the silence with long messages, questions, stories, explanations, trying to rebuild connection quickly, but attraction rarely grows through pressure. Attraction grows through space. And space is exactly what we will talk about next, because sometimes the most powerful move after she returns is knowing when to slow down. Many men believe attraction grows through constant communication, more messages, more conversation, more explanations. But in reality, attraction often grows in the spaces between conversations. The moments where curiosity has room to breathe. Think about it. When someone receives long paragraphs immediately after reconnecting, the emotional mystery disappears very quickly. Everything becomes predictable again. But when communication stays calm, short, and relaxed, something different happens. Interest begins to rebuild naturally. This is because female attraction often grows through emotional curiosity, curiosity about who you are, curiosity about what you are doing, curiosity about the life you live when she is not present. And curiosity cannot grow if every detail is immediately revealed, which is why emotional balance in conversation is so important. Imagine she sends another message, something casual. How have you been? Now, many men see this question as an invitation to explain everything. They begin writing long responses, talking about work, talking about their routine, talking about how busy they were, but there's a much calmer way to respond. Something simple, something relaxed, something like, things have been good, keeping busy lately, short, clear, balanced. Notice what this type of response does. It answers the question without giving away everything, and that small sense of mystery becomes emotionally interesting. She begins filling in the blanks with her imagination. What has he been busy with? What has he been doing? Has his life changed? And this is where curiosity quietly begins doing the work for you. Because curiosity pulls attention, and attention is the foundation of attraction. But there is something even deeper happening psychologically in this moment, something many men completely overlook. When a woman returns after silence, she is often observing the emotional environment of the interaction, not consciously, but emotionally she is sensing things like, does he sound resentful? Does he sound desperate? Does he sound emotionally dependent? Or does he sound calm? And emotional calmness is incredibly powerful because calmness signals something deeper than confidence. It signals emotional self-sufficiency, a man whose happiness does not depend entirely on attention, a man whose life continues moving forward, a man whose focus is not limited to one conversation. When this energy becomes visible, respect begins growing quietly, and respect is the foundation that allows attraction to grow again. But here is another important insight. Sometimes when a woman reconnects after silence, she does not immediately show strong interest again. Her messages might stay light, casual, even slightly distant. And this is where many men make another mistake. They start trying to recreate the old emotional energy immediately. They try to force excitement. They try to revive the previous connection too quickly. But attraction rarely works like a switch. It behaves more like a slow emotional temperature change. When distance happens, the emotional temperature drops, and when communication returns, that warmth must rebuild gradually, which means patience becomes extremely important. Patience communicates emotional maturity. Instead of forcing connection, you simply allow the interaction to evolve naturally, short conversations, occasional messages, relaxed tone, and slowly interest begins warming again. Now, something interesting often happens at this stage when a woman realizes that you are calm, not chasing, and not emotionally reacting to the previous silencer. Her curiosity about you begins increasing. She starts paying more attention. She starts observing your tone, your replies, your emotional energy, and this curiosity sometimes turns into something else. Respect, because emotional stability is one of the most respected qualities in attraction dynamics. It signals strength, it signals maturity, and it signals self-awareness. And when a woman begins respecting a man emotionally, her interest often grows stronger now at this point. There is another subtle principle that becomes important. Something many men underestimate: consistency. Your calm response in the beginning is powerful, but it must also remain consistent. If you begin calm, but later become overly eager, the emotional signal becomes confusing. Consistency communicates authenticity. It shows that your calmness is not a strategy. It is simply who you are, and authenticity is deeply attractive, because people naturally trust what feels genuine. Now imagine the emotional contrast she begins noticing. Instead of emotional pressure, she experiences relaxed conversation. Instead of chasing, she experiences calm presence. And slowly a new emotional dynamic begins forming. But there is still one final principle in this situation that most men never fully understand. A principle that quietly determines whether attraction continues growing or slowly fades again. It is not about texting, it is not about clever messages, and it is not about psychological tricks. It is about the energy behind your life, because the most attractive signal a man can send is not found in a message. It is found in the feeling that his life is already meaningful, with or without constant attention. And when that energy becomes real, not forced, not performed, just naturally present, something powerful begins happening. People start feeling it without you explaining anything. And that is when attraction becomes effortless. Not because you are trying to impress someone, but because your life already has direction, purpose, movement. And when someone enters that life, they feel like they are joining something meaningful, not becoming the center of it. That difference changes everything, which leads us to the most important insight of all. The moment she texts you after silence is not really about her message. It is about who you are in that moment, the man who was waiting, or the man who kept moving forward. And the difference between those two men is the difference between chasing attention and attracting it naturally, because in the end, that difference is what quietly defines every relationship dynamic. Two men can experience the exact same situation, both receive the same message, both read the same words, "Hey stranger," but the emotional reaction inside them can be completely different. One man feels relief, his heart begins racing, his mind starts thinking Finally, she texted. The other man reads the message calmly. He acknowledges it. But emotionally, his day continues exactly the same. And that difference is not about pretending. It's about how stable someone's inner world really is. Because when your emotional balance depends heavily on someone else's attention, your reactions become predictable. You reply instantly. You reveal excitement too quickly. You show emotional investment before the connection has rebuilt itself. And when emotional investment appears too early, attraction often fades. Not because interest disappears completely, but because the emotional mystery disappears. Mystery is one of the most powerful forces in attraction. When someone feels they fully understand your emotional position, curiosity fades. But when your emotional world feels calm, stable, and slightly unpredictable, curiosity grows. And curiosity keeps attention alive. Now think about the woman who sent that message after silence. When she pressed send, she likely did not know exactly how you would respond. Would you ignore her? Would you sound annoyed? Would you sound excited? That uncertainty created curiosity for her too. And when your response appears calm, balanced, and relaxed, that curiosity grows stronger. Because suddenly she begins realizing something. Your emotional world did not revolve around that silence. Your life continued moving. Your energy stayed centered. Your focus remained on things that matter, and this realization quietly changes how she perceives you. Because emotional stability is deeply attractive. It signals maturity. It signals confidence. And most importantly, it signals that your life already has direction. Now, here is something many men misunderstand about attraction. They believe attraction grows from effort, more texting, more attention, more emotional reassurance. But attraction often grows from something much quieter: presence. The calm presence of someone who knows their value. Someone who is not competing for attention, someone who is not performing for approval, someone who simply exists with confidence in their own life. When a man develops that kind of presence, his interactions naturally feel different. His words feel lighter. His conversations feel calmer because he is not trying to prove anything. And people naturally feel that energy. Now, this does not mean you should become distant or cold. It simply means you remain emotionally balanced. You enjoy conversations. You appreciate connection. But your emotional stability does not depend on constant attention. This mindset changes how people experience you. Because instead of feeling pressure, they feel space. And space allows attraction to grow naturally, which brings us back to that simple moment, the moment your phone lights up and you see her name appear again. At that moment, the most powerful thing you can do is surprisingly simple. Stay calm. Not because you are playing games, not because you are trying to manipulate the situation, but because your life genuinely continues with or without that message. And when that mindset becomes real, not forced, not performed, people begin feeling it immediately. Your responses become lighter, your conversations feel relaxed, and your presence begins creating natural attraction. Because confidence that is quiet often speaks louder than confidence that tries to impress. So the next time a woman texts you after silence, remember something important. You are not just replying to a message. You are communicating who you are emotionally, a man who is waiting or a man who kept moving forward. One response comes from uncertainty, the other comes from self-respect. And self-respect is something people always feel, even through a simple text message, because the strongest position in any relationship is never needing to prove your value. When you truly understand your worth, your actions naturally reflect it. Your tone reflects it. Your presence reflects it. And when that happens, attraction no longer feels forced. It becomes something that grows naturally around you, not because you are chasing attention, but because your life already carries meaning, direction, purpose. And people are naturally drawn toward that energy. If you found this insight valuable, make sure to subscribe for more content on female psychology and relationship dynamics most men are never taught. Because understanding these subtle dynamics can completely change the way you experience relationships. And remember this, real confidence is not about controlling others. It's about mastering your own emotional stability. The moment you stop chasing validation, your presence begins attracting respect. And when respect and emotional balance meet, attraction often follows naturally. So focus on building a life that feels meaningful to you, a life that continues moving forward, whether someone texts you or not. Because the man who understands his value never needs to chase attention. Attention finds him.